Blessings and welcome back, everyone, to our 26th episode in our journey through the zodiacal faces. I'm Elsa, and I'm joined today by brilliant astrologers KD Dayton and David Fisher. We are here for Sagittarius II. So the dates for this Decan are December 1st or 2nd through the 10th or 11th. Austin Coppock calls this the bridal, as in like the horse tack, the bridle that restrains or helps control the horse. And T. Susan Chang calls this tensile strength. The hermetic name for the minor arcana card is the Lord of Great Strength. So we're right in line with T. Susan's. So the Nine of Wands here in the hermetic deck. And then of course we have the Temperance card still joining us as the Sagittarius card for all of Sagittarius. And then we have the Moon as the co-ruler or co-lord with Jupiter for this Decan. So we've got the High Priestess as the Moon card.
I guess that as a preliminary, I would like to just say, throw it out there, that it's interesting to look at the combination of cards, the Moon and Temperance, much like some other combinations that we've looked at in the past, and see the association with the minor arcana, in this case, the Nine of Wands being made. Just like you see the Hierophant and the Magician, for instance, generating the Five of Pentacles, it doesn't seem intuitive at first, but once you start diving deeper into the concepts that these sources that we're exploring have around these archetypes, you kind of understand more deeply what the interpretations should be of these cards. Yeah, ideally, you know, in these types of connections, it's really interesting. Combinations allow you to see to visualize more of how tarot works.
Actually, I'm really glad you said that, David, because I've been noticing as we've been doing research for this Decan, the similarities in the cards. So like, I think the mother piece shows it really well. So here we've got the High Priestess and here we've got Temperance. And to me, like, they're shamans of a different order, but on the same like playing field or something, you know? So you've still got them dealing with these realms of like alchemy and inner wisdom and things like this.
I've just brought this up about the tarot now, but we're going to discuss it later with the T. Susan Chang analysis. But I just wanted to bring it up because it's not intuitive to imagine the associations that we're going to make further on the video.
Yeah, it is really good to keep in mind, David, like just to start off. And I guess that being said, the 4 9s in tarot refer to the Yesod, forgive me if I'm not saying that properly, on the Tree of Life. And it rules the second decans of all the mutable signs. So that's really interesting to keep in mind too, if we're taking like a meta look at just why these cards are being placed here in their assignments. We've got the mutable signs, second decan, always being upheld or represented by the 9s. After the problems and misfortunes of the 7s and the 8s, we now have a great crystallization of energy. So a powerfully formed, strong, firm foundation for like good and evil. So I think that's just good, like good meta information as we start to, I guess, dissect and look at this space. So Austin Coppock in 36 Faces refers to this, like I said, as the bridal. Here we see Sagittarius is the unification of desperate elements in order to achieve the goal. So I think that is really indicative again of that Temperance card, or even the Moon here as the ruler. So being represented, like we talked about this last time, being represented by the Centaur, which is this synthesization of man and beast. The second face of Sagittarius, figures struggle to maintain unity under the what feels like assault of contrary forces. So it's utterly necessary here to produce this force of will that's required to sustain the conjunction between the body and the spirit, which is kind of like the purpose of this space. So again, the ability to keep the mind and body in line with your intention despite contrary forces. And he talks about this friction is necessary to generate the heat capable of fusing the mind and body. So like the vehicle and the will, like we talked about, with, you know, almost seeing the horse as like the chariot for the soul, or the matter being the chariot for the soul. So he says there's no hero without a nemesis. So I think we're going to be, you know, delving into that friction of, you know, in order to sort of overcome, or in order to, you know, reach the destination. It's almost like the kind of like journey of the Hobbit or something. Like you have to undergo these like trials of fire to get to the ultimate thing, the hero's journey, shall we say, type of a thing, which I guess, you know, is the fool in the tarot journey as well.
And
so, yep, go ahead.
One thing I want to say is this Decan, I think we could say it's a lot like show us what you're here for, or the way that I'm thinking about it right now with everything that you're saying and having reflected a little bit on it prior, is that it's kind of show me what you're here for. If you have a spiritual inclination, if you have a path that you're following, that you're going through, do you have the necessary apparatus? Are you resourceful? Do you does your body support? Does your subconscious motivations also support that spiritual endeavor that you're in, that path that your spirit is treading?
Yeah, I had that in my notes when we come to T. Susan as well, not to jump in and out of 36 spaces, but I think you hit the nail on the head with this one, because you know, T. Susan got me thinking about the same thing, about like the inner and outer journey, and like what it takes, sort of like she's talking about when we're talking about like the fortification of what that would mean as an inner journey. We're talking about like character building, and that's what you're talking about like on a hero's journey as well, is like when you're faced with the hard times, you know, and that difficult terrain or whatever it is on that quest, because we're talking about like traveling, right? We're talking about chariots and horses, and we're thinking of Sagittarius as like the adventurer, and like not necessarily the conqueror, but like the wild, great, you know, unknown, or something like this, the expanse of Jupiter. We're at the middle part of the journey here, where we have to sort of be like, we've come this far and we've learned, we have all these resources, but we have to be creative on how to use the knowledge we have, those resources so far, but like there's still a lot of the journey left to go. So just that character building, like you don't know what's going to be around the next corner. You have to be inventive, creative, brave, bold, and like it builds character when you have this difficult terrain. And
and you can kind of think of the character building as well as that tempering. You know, the inner and outer are the two extremes of heat and cold, but it's the character that's being tempered, like the sword in the middle.
Absolutely. And that's, you know, he'll go on to talk about Agrippa and Picatrix. I'm not going to go into all that, but yeah, the Liber Hermetis talks about that, as well as like the difficult terrain, and the inherently hostile environment to its traveler, right? And like if you think about Jupiter in general, you think about like hope, or at least I do, right? I think about like hope and positive attitude, and you know, like you know, blessings in disguise, and like cup half full, and all of that stuff. And to me, that is like that boldness, especially when you think about the moon. You have like all the unknown and all the multiplicity, and you have to sort of like have the cup half full and find your inner strength and your inner fortitude, and be like, it's all going to be okay. We have this, you know, we have to return the one ring to the thing, and it's like it keeps you going, or whatever, you know. So
and we have seen this before with Libra having the initial decan of that sign. I mean, yeah, the initial decan of that sign ruled by the moon. we saw with the Two of Swords that multiplicity of ideas can get in your way sometimes, like having too much in your head. But this, we're talking about the moon in a fire sign. We're talking about wands. We're talking about action. We're talking about boldness, basically. So it's not going to be that impasse, that conundrum represented by the Two of Swords. It's going to be more of an assertive, directed action type of,
yeah, like
action-oriented type of.
Yeah, like a plunge through or carry through. Like there's all this, but I have my sights set on the one goal and I'm charging ahead or something.
Yeah. Well, and actually, we should mention the other decans that have the moon as co-ruler, which are Taurus 2 and Cancer 3. So it's been Taurus 2, Cancer 3, Libra 1, and now we have the moon in Sag.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, that's good to keep in mind. Fire sign. And you know what I was thinking about Jupiter too? I don't know why this just dawned on me today, but I was thinking about Jupiter happening, its signs, its major signs, Sagittarius and Pisces, happening in like the winter season. Where it's like almost requires you to have like more hope. Because I was like, God, it's like so depressing. Like, why is it Jupiter time in the darkest, like kind of coldest? Well, I live in a really cold area, but it's just like it kind of requires that persistence to even go outside and like start the vehicle and shovel the snow and like do all the things.
There are tons of Sagittarians, I feel like, that have a really dark sense of humor for that reason. It's like almost absurdist or nihilistic, because it's almost like that madness of being in the dark all the time. You're trying to laugh about it.
And you need to like start the fire and, you know, bring out the candles and like light the incense and have the drinks and play games with your friends and like try to lighten the spirit and find the hope. Because it's like, yeah, you don't want to go outside is a challenge, at least, you know, in my terrain. Outside is a big challenge, so then you're sort of forced inside, but you have to come up with like a positive vibe or you're going to get like the seasonal blues or something like this.
Well,
right?
that's the other thing though. I mean, optimism and pessimism can be the same sort of tempering forces that really create a character of a lot of strength and will and fortitude. But the thing about Sagittarius that's interesting is I know a lot of Sagittarii who maybe have that sense of humor, but are in fact very dark, sometimes depressed or struggling with other issues. And it makes me think about how you know, Mercury and Venus can't ever be too far away from the sun. And so it's likely that a lot of those folks have some things in Scorpio or Capricorn, a little more serious signs. So it's always interesting to me, this kind of like one-sided Sagittarius is almost always tempered by a darker, more brooding side.
Yeah, and it's also, if you think about it, being like the signs that flank the solstice, you know, like, and you think about Capricorn, everyone thinks about Capricorn as like dark, I guess, or maybe they think of it as ambitious, right? And not everyone thinks about Sagittarius as dark. They think about it as, you know, like jovial or something, but it characterizes this sort of like undertone of those signs. And if you think of like humor just in general, like I think of Mercury, of course, but I also think of, you know, Sag, which is one of those parallels between Jupiter and Mercury that we see again. But you sort of, all humor is a little bit dark. Like all humor is a little bit desperate, because it's like, we need to laugh, like something, there's a tension that's building that makes humor sort of bubble up and bubble over, right? Like why something is funny, because it's so absurd and it's so silly, or it's just like, oh, I've had all these worries and it just bubbles out.
Break of expectation.
What's that?
It's a break with expectation.
Yeah, and that humor piece is really interesting, as far as like lightening the mood and like building the character. Like, how are we going to take the challenges and kind of, can we lighten them and laugh at them and all that? That's a part of, I guess, character building or resilience, or showing like, you know, a lot of wise people, like if you go to shamans or elders or something, they'll just tell you jokes.
So this is just making me laugh so hard. I neglected to mention at the top that my ascendant degree is in this Decan, and it's ruled by Jupiter and Taurus conjunct the moon. I feel like I'm an honorary Sag moon somehow, but
You get it, girl. You get it.
This Decan, that really speaks to me a lot, what you just said. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's totally here. I'm glad you mentioned that. So you definitely have a lot of personal wisdom that you could probably provide for us during this.
Sag style wisdom.
Absolutely. All right. So yes, then he talks about, okay, so back to Austin's 36 faces. He talks about, you know, the Liber Hermetis as the weasel, and how the weasel, you know, okay, we think of it as shady, blah, 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 but then how it usually is known for like fighting any other animal, even bigger than it, with its like ferocious like vibe. So it's got that cunning sort of like, I'll take on anybody. And if you know Sagittarius, I love you guys, like it has that quality of just like, bring it on, like come at me, like say it, or you know what I'm saying? It's just like willing to take on anything or anyone or any challenge, and it's kind of like lighthearted, and it's like, you know, got that vibe. So okay, the fragmentary Hellenistic text, and I think he's talking about the 36 heirs here. Again, we see the Persephone archetype, which we talked about in the last video, but he talks about it quite at length here, about Persephone bringing the Furies against those who have wronged, and you know, kind of a lot of her story. So I hope you guys can go check that out. I'm not going to belabor it too much because we talked a lot about it last time. But he says those who walk in this Decan encounter circumstances adversarial to their intentions. So it's almost like a test. Like if you're setting out for the one thing and you have the intention, like you're gonna encounter those bumps along the way. And I think I'm gonna go to T. Susan's, the notes I took from T. Susan, but I think that speaks to the moon here, because it's just like, if you have a long journey to go to and you have like you know, you're shooting the arrow at that target, and then you bring the moon in, you just have such a diverse multiplicity of things that might happen along the way, whether good or bad, that kind of can just, you know, provide characters for that journey, shall we say. The figures that result process are ruthless, bold, and of undivided will. They have triumphed over their antagonists. It's important for those who reside within this Decan to recognize that not all that is contrary to them should be met with fierce resistance. So many circumstances may not demand or not reward such a response, and we have to learn when to yield in order to gain mastery. So it's kind of like, you know, when to be boisterous, or using that wisdom of Jupiter. Like not everything is worth the fight, I guess, is what we should remember here. Choose your battles wisely, I guess. T. Susan, a few notes that I have, not necessarily just about the cards, but just in general from her chapter, is she's saying like the natives, or this Decan, is no stranger to battle. So it's like constantly having to do that. So you might feel like you constantly have those adversaries, or constantly have those things that you're coming up against. And I think, again, that speaks to what Austin was saying about like choose your battles wisely. And how to stretch or expand under pressure, right? And not break under pressure. And to me, that's like very lunar and very like feminine of this. This speaks to like the moon and the high priestess. So that's when she goes on to talk about not all physical forms of this pressure. It can be like the human character and the quality of resilience. So that's what I really liked, besides just the character building, is just the resilience. I think that's a perfect word for the people that would have to constantly go up against battles and decide what's worth fighting for. When I think about character, I think about someone who's very resilient, especially in a Jupiterian sign, where it's like, we talked about that humor and that sort of cup half full. That's a very resilient.
The hope.
Yeah, it's a very resilient quality.
We have talked before, when we brought up the moon, about this quality of multiplicity and how one has to select from multiplicity that which is most like oneself to be able to express. And here we have the opportunity given to really come up with the actions to what we imagine life is asking of us. It's like with the Two of Swords, we had to make ourselves aware of the multiplicity in our ideas, our biases. We still have to select an idea from which to build action from. In this case, it is the action itself being put to the test. It is a test. It is like a test. It's like, oh, so you believe you can overcome this particular circumstance in your life. Let's test your beliefs. This is what the Decan kind of does.
I like what you're saying about like the testing of beliefs, because when you think about Jupiter, you think about beliefs, right? Like not facts like Mercury, like beliefs or faith or something like this. And it's like to find someone with a weak character or with a strong character, it's like, yeah, you talk all that faith about everything that you believe, but then I see you acting like this, or, you know, it's like when you find someone of resilience and character, you see how their beliefs and their actions sort of stay the course and they sort of reflect each other. So that's what, you know, and it comes in the face of like all the multiplicity of life. Like if we're not shaken by all the multiplicity, then we say, oh yeah, that person's resilient. They've got great character because their beliefs and their actions are like directed in the same target, shall we say. Which
is why this is a 9. We're gonna get to the tarot soon, but this is a 9 of almost completion, like completion really, because the 10 is something else, but this is the completion of the deck of wands, a suit of wands. Suit, you know.
Same.
And by being that completion, it's like you are putting to the test again. It feels like one of the final stages. I believe all of this. I have constructed all of these ideals, and I have been put to through some trials. Now, after going through those trials, I have to be tried again one last time, but with all those ideals present. It's like, yeah, I have all that experience and I still have to give one less push. I still have to do one less thing to prove my character or to select, or
it's like the light at the end of the tunnel almost, like you can see the destination, right?
Yeah, I think T. Susan mentioned something like the light at the end of the tunnel too, and I was thinking about it as the test too, and I kind of was thinking about the next decan, which is going to be Saturn ruled, where like the pressure's really on. Here I feel like we're just really in the middle of the journey. Like we're still just like half's behind us, half's in front of us. We're having to have that resilience, and then it's not over even till the end, you know, and we're going to see how Saturn puts a little bit more pressure on. So we have like two types of pressure at Jupiter here. One, which is the multiplicity of the moon and everything that it takes to wade through that. And then the second pressure, which is going to come in the next decan, which is pressure of Saturn, of having to the path narrowing and narrowing and narrowing to where now we have that like one last act to complete the journey. So the one thing I wanted to mention here about the moon being the ruler is T. Susan said change is stability. And what it reminded me of for all of those Vipassana, who people say it differently, meditators, which I've you know, I'm a student of Vipassana from Goenkaji, and this concept of anicca. So the idea that the only thing that's permanent in life is change. Like that's the only thing you can count on. So you have to settle into that shaky ground almost, right? Is that if you notice your mind, it's constantly changing. You notice your body, it's constantly changing. There's nothing that isn't immovable, and yet as humans we sort of want to fix and we want to grasp for that sort of stable nature, for that comfort.
Identity.
Yeah, and the idea of like resting in anicca, resting, finding your stability, your ground in the fact that change is the only permanence. It's the only thing you can count on. So again, make friends with it. So like it's the only thing, like death, right? Like it's so uncomfortable, but it's the only thing that we can count on, right? So
Please let's not reminisce on Scorpio season. I really want to forget it.
oh, I know. I'm so sorry. Let's move on. But yeah, so the that change is stability. Anyway, just that idea of like change is stability that T. Susan talks about, and that concept of anicca, I just thought was really kind of a beautiful Jupiter moon alchemy, Jupiter moon temperance, of just really getting comfortable with that idea. And then the moon also being fortunate or unfortunate depending on her condition, I also think is part of that like resilience of the journey type of a thing, is when you're faced with all this multiplicity, you can have like fortunate, cool things happen on a journey and unfortunate things, and you just sort of have to deal with them as they come when you're in that sort of middle ground of your journey. And again, that's what builds character, is maybe not like being so up and down, speaking of temperance, like so like, you know, hot and cold in nature, like you were saying, KD, but having that sort of middle ground of like, whether a fortunate event happens or whether an unfortunate event happens, I'm still like remaining towards my goal and in my character and things like that. So T. Susan talks a little bit about like being out of your comfort zone here, and how you're really kind of dealing with a defense for like a self-preservation mode kind of a thing. And then conserving or defending your strength is another theme here. And just needing to stay the course, or sticking to your guns. So, you know, creative stamina, things like that.
And again, we need to think about these signs, and I brought this up in Libra and Gemini, I believe, that these are masculine signs. We are talking about signs that are disruptive. We are talking about signs that are not comfortable to deal with. The suits in tarot are just the same. They are also uncomfortable when they are talking about swords and wands. So here, even though we're talking about the moon and Jupiter, which are planets that are normally considered to be benefic in influence, we still are talking about their influence over a ground that requires action and moving and, you know, spending of energy, of life force, you know. And the more in line your mind is with your body, in the sense that you know yourself, you know how to use your body properly, and you've gotten familiar enough with it and its functions that you can express it in any way you want, and people will get the effect that you expect, you know, or that the results will be that which you anyway, you react to circumstance as you think you should to preserve your image in the multiple. Like, people need to perceive you in that regard, as you are. But it's not something forced. It's not something thought out, like in the air signs. It's not an idea. Here it is what it is. You are forced to embody what you have at hand. Jupiter, your supports.
Yeah,
that
all that is making me think of or to like a few things to just what you were saying, is just like, you know, the resilience or body being aligned with spirit, like you were saying, but we were talking about the benefic force. And if you think about the fire quality, and then you think of like benefic force, to me, it's like almost like we don't want trial and tribulation, but like trial and tribulation and multiplicity and making choices and tests and like all of these things, although they're uncomfortable, again, that's that fire quality of the benefic. It is benefic, right? it is benefic to have to make choices and go through hard times to come out the other side, because that's what builds your fortitude and your character. So like, you know, we don't want to, but you know, T. Susan talks about like the vision quest of the Lakota and things like this, right? Like going through like trials on purpose, going through hard things on purpose is a lot of these like shamanistic vision quests, like ayahuasca or something. It's like you have to go through these really deep, crappy trials, but it's actually a benefic force.
Again, Jupiter is the planet of truth, so it brings out the truth in one's character. You have to respond to circumstance quickly. It demands quick swiftness of action, and for that you have to be to embody what is easy, most familiar to you.
And solid in character. Like if you have the moon coming at you with a quickness, like you have to have your mind and your spirit and your body sort of all aligned in order to like react properly in a quick situation where you would need to, like a wand of fire.
And when you react like that, it is bringing out the truth of your character facing that situation.
Yeah,
absolutely. I really, really like that too. And it really makes me think, you know, the last card that we studied, the last Decan, the Eight of Wands, is all about swiftness, but there's still that swiftness in this card. It kind of is throughout the Decan of Sagittarius, that galloping horse.
Yeah, it's really interesting how fiery this Jupiter nature is, right? And to put Jupiter in the context, like put the guru in the context of fire, right? So just like we were saying, like the force of fire or whatever, like pressurizes you into a situation where your character is revealed, or you're able to sort of demonstrate your character. Because when are you able to really demonstrate your character if not in a difficult time, I guess? Or when are we able to build that? T. Susan likens it to the immune system. So like the warrior grows stronger with exposure, like the immune system does, or like the high priestess or temperance, it knows much and says little, right? So it's like each time you're exposed to something, it's giving you more and more information to sort of, you know, your immune system is vulnerable. Austin actually talks a lot about this, and I forget what video I mentioned it in, where in my yoga classes and with my students, I will talk a lot about bravery and vulnerability, how they meet. So like the only time we really need to be brave is in moments where we're really vulnerable, right? And when we're being sort of, you know, oh, this is really uncomfortable, and now I have to sort of rise to the occasion, right? And in yoga, we do that all the time. Like the body feels fragile, it feels weak. It's like pushing itself to that limit all the time, of where it's just feeling super vulnerable. And that's the one time where we need to find that inner strength, take those deep breaths, like meet the occasion softly, but with bravery. And like the warrior is not just like unafraid, it knows what it stands to lose in the battle, right? But it goes out there anyways because it's worth fighting for, or whatever that is. So T. Susan talks about, so Austin talks about that bravery and vulnerability play a lot in this Decan. And then T. Susan talks about one brave thing. So she says, she kind of came up with this, I don't know if it was because of this Decan, but she talks about it in the chapter about this Decan, how she does one brave thing every day. So whether that's like writing an email to someone that you like feel is superior to you and you want their, you know, their sort of blessing, or, you know, anything, like she talks about like household things that might be gross or disgusting. So she just says one brave thing. And she keeps talking about that throughout the chapter, of like each day finding that one brave thing that you can sort of rise to cultivate that warrior spirit. And then I guess the takeaway from T. Susan's chapter about that one brave thing and the play of vulnerability and the moon and all this, with the anicca and everything, the takeaway to me is to stay flexible, stay movable, you know, don't go to extremes. So yeah, so I think that's what I have for now, without going deeply into the cards. Do you guys have anything more you want to say before we dive into the cards?
I just want to say that if you're enjoying this content, please leave a comment with an emoji. It will really help us with the algorithm and everything. Also, share this content if you like with anyone you think would want to hear it. And give us a like. It doesn't cost anything. It's really quick. The button is right here. Subscribe.
I know. Thank you. Yeah, David, thank you. And it's good to do this actually in the middle. I like that you mentioned that, because we get like, you know, like when we post a video within the first week, we get a lot of you that are viewing it. Like 60 to 80 people are viewing it within the first week. But sometimes we only have like 5 or 6 likes. Like, if you guys watch it and not like it, come on, like hit us up a little, like give us a horse
some
emoji, or what is the bow and arrow emoji or something?
Or a little horse emoji for the bridal. I will read the Picatrix. There rises in the second face of Sagittarius, according to the Picatrix, a man leading cows, and in front of him he has an ape and a bear. This is a face of fear, lamentations, grief, sadness, misery, and troubles. This is its form. So not happy. Not a happy place to be, according
It's
to
really
this book.
interesting the way the Picatrix breaks these down. And again, it's multiple authors, and it's, you know, a later, more quote unquote medieval text or whatever than the Hellenistic era text. But it's interesting that it's such a sort of defiled face or whatever in a Jupiter rule. Like, you know, it's just sometimes runs contrary, right? We're like, oh, this is Jupiter sign. It should be like all full of blessings and gods and gurus and all of this. And then you're like, oh, it's defiled and it's treacherous and all of these things, you know? So what do we make of it? For me, I was thinking a little bit about like the idea of protection or bravery or vulnerability. Like if you think of like a shepherd, right, like watching its flocks by night. Oh my gosh, I'm in Christmas spirit. You think of like these predators, or even yourself on a journey, right? Like you're thinking, I could encounter a wolf or a bear, like something like this, and it's like takes so much bravery to sort of defend your position. And that makes me think of like a wands type of scenario again, is like a bravery to stand up to the predator or protect your position or plow through like a scary natural scenario when you're like out there on your journey through the wild unknown.
Well, it's interesting because in 36 Secrets, T. Susan Chang notes that there's another set of images that are associated with this Decan from like the Yavana Jataka, for instance, which is a woman with precious gems, distributing precious gems. And there's kind of a interesting amorality to that. Like it could be that she's giving them away charitably, or it could be that she's getting rid of stolen items, but it's like precious materials. It's a little more positive, I guess, or maybe more neutral.
Well, here we see again another show of wealth with a guy or conduct cattle.
Yeah.
You know, it's a show of wealth in other words. And I see the bear and the monkey perhaps as the monkey being more of an animal part of men, perhaps, represented there, and the bear being more of an animal part of men, but more of like the bear in the Lenormand deck, I'm thinking, for instance, like an institution, like a overpowering, dominant, man-made institution or something like that is represented by the cattle owner. And I'm thinking about Jupiter. And I'm thinking about how someone who has precious items has to really be concerned of how they distribute them, like you were talking about the gems, or how they care for them. With all the challenges that the Picatrix, and protect them, how the Picatrix is laying out all these challenges that come with this deck and talking about these images with it. I'm thinking about how power and responsibility really walk hand in hand, and how it's we're going to go through that in the tarot, how in the Rider-Waite you have a guy that has bandages over his head, almost like he's been in battle and he's in a defensive posture. And that defensiveness kind of being the result of this,
being like wary, like.
Yeah, wary.
The sort of being wary, or the precious gem distribution, or the flocks, or being like having to protect that flock, or see how to distribute your wealth or something like this. reminds me of the High Priestess and Temperance, of that wisdom of knowing like when the student can handle the knowledge, or when to keep the knowledge in an internal space, or when to distribute it, or even the precious gems that are that knowledge from Jupiter, the High Priestess, being distributed to the people or whatever. So
Yeah,
just,
like not distributing pearls to pigs, as Jesus
yeah,
would put
not
it.
casting your pearls before swine or something like that. And that's kind of what it makes me think of, like if you have a flock of sheep, or if you have something really precious, that pressure to protect it and get the sheep from one area to another, protect it from like all these outside influences, right? Like the multiplicity of predators on the journey or something like this, to me talks about like encountering those different fears or something like this. And I'm probably going to slaughter this, but when we think about the bear in Native American culture, it's a really beautiful totem animal that has to do with bravery. And the reason why I thought of this is T. Susan talking about like that, shamanistic like medicine circle, or when you're talking about like a vision quest, a lot of times you call in the strength of the bear to help you, summon that fortitude that it has through winter, that it can collect all this precious gems and sustain the winter through hibernation, sort of a thing, and come out the other side like brave and wise and things like that. So it kind of makes me think of that process of when to hold your knowledge as a wisdom keeper, when to rise and how to distribute those gems, how to protect those gems and things like that.
We have Temperance as the ruler, or the card associated with the sign of Sagittarius. And so I brought a couple of different depictions of Temperance than the ones that we saw last time here, as far as tarot cards go. One of the overarching things that I want to mention about the card Temperance that specifically relates to this Decan is that, we talked about the process of tempering and going to extremes. I've talked about the hot and the cold and the forging of the sword. But something to remember is that there is like a really broad range in between the two extremes, and that contributes something of a visionary, a broad-mindedness, an open-mindedness, a far-sightedness to the sign of Sagittarius. So that is something actually that makes for a very good warrior, which is something to remember when we get to the Nine of Wands and we see the figure that I think David referenced earlier, who is not looking in great shape.
Yeah, and tying into that not looking in great shape, I wanted to conclude back then, and I had forgotten what I was saying, but it was about how responsibility makes you weary, and how you have responsibility over that which you claim you are. So, and Temperance really with the moon here teaches us to not expose too much of ourselves and of our strengths and of our treasured capabilities towards things that are not important to us. So we must be defensive, and we must know when to attack also. But speaking of the Nine of Wands, specifically in terms of when to do that, to protect, either attack or defend, to protect our treasures, who we are, our essence, in a way. And by doing so,
like not giving too much of yourself away, because once you give away like all these things, and it's like big talkers, right? It's like, I'm this and I'm that and I'm this, and it's like, well, then all of a sudden you have to protect and defend all those things that you said that you were. So like keeping those treasures safe and protected and knowing how to distribute. It's again, like Austin was saying, like choosing your battles wisely, and that wisdom coming from the Jupiterian.
And you guys can see the Temperance in it as well.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
Oh yeah, for sure. So on the left we have the medieval Scapini deck, a favorite. And in this depiction, I think it's pretty cool to see a few different symbols going on here that we actually haven't seen in other cards before that I know of. One of them is that the two pictures she's pouring from are absolutely the sun and the moon. The moon is very clearly the moon, the silver crescent, and the sun is represented by a golden lion, ruling the sign of Leo. Also in the background, you have a white dove underneath which Jesus is being baptized in the stream, which I think is a very interesting thing to consider in relation to Temperance, because of that transformative element of Temperance, of going through the heating and the cooling. It can kind of be an initiation. I know you mentioned, Elsa, earlier, the shamanic initiation that can really kind of come out when you're thinking about these extremes and moderating the two.
Yeah, and that process of purification through, the Sundance, or the process of the purification in the baptism, and that process of once you do that transformation, like we said before, like once the two cups are mixed, you sort of can't take the water and the wine back out of each other, right? Once you because tempering wine would be taking wine and water and mixing them. And so then you can't sort of take the water back out and take the wine back out, you've already tempered it, it's already together. And the purification ritual, or like the bravery of sort of saying like you're born anew, or just like the idea at the time of like Jesus, let's say, I think why it was so, to me, like why it might have been such a popular idea, or why it took such hold, besides like all the other kind of what I think corrupted church did to sort of spread Christianity. I think the idea at the time of like having free will and being forgiven and being born anew was like a very liberating concept to people that were really solidly like being taught like this is fate and these are the gods and everything's sort of like plunge, like it's already written in the stars and you can't like sort of escape your fate and everything. And then you have this idea of like you can be born anew, you can be forgiven, you can be a child of God, you can make your own choices, it's not all fate. Like a lot of that is a very liberating and Jupiterian idea, especially to the downtrodden, or the poor, or things like this, right? The poor and needy, and like those messages, that is a message of transformation, that I think is really appealing. Like the idea that you can be forgiven, your sins can be washed away, or just even, and not even that concept, but just the process of renewal, the process of initiation, the process of a ritual journey, I think is represented, again here in the baptism.
And there is a point in a process where you just let reactions happen. You don't keep doing anything, like you don't have to do much, you just put things in place and the reactions will happen by themselves. Much like in the distillation process, you are putting the fire in place there, but then the process kind of happens by itself. Things separate on their own once you put things in motion. But why I'm saying this is because in this Capenidac, you see Jesus being baptized, but the focus, I suppose, is on the dove. Why I say that is because that is the Holy Spirit confirming, the symbol of the Holy Spirit confirming Jesus' divinity. And his ministry began at that point. Actually, Jesus' storyline only takes place within a space of 3 years. It takes place within a space of 3 years. From the moment where he's baptized and confirmed as God's child in this depiction to the moment where he's crucified, there's only 3 years. This is when he's 30 years old. He was preparing before that. This is kind of that moment where lead turns to gold. But then again, it has that association with the 9 of Wands, to which we're going to jump to in a second. But he got responsible. Once he was confirmed as the Son of God, he became responsible for that title, for that particular embodiment of that particular archetype. And temperance here is just to come back to this moment, is just talking about this confirmation moment where you just, you don't need to do anything. Circumstance just come and confirms your expectations in a way.
Yeah, 2 things I want to say, just building off that, is one, the dove is like a sign of hope. It can be a Venusian bird in some of the ancient texts, but just like the dove was also the one that like brought the olive branch to the ark or whatever, and it was a sign of like new life, or there was land out there after the great flood or whatever. So again, that reminds me of like a Jupiterian hope type of quality. And then we see the river that Jesus is being baptized in reminds me of the river that flows from the high priestess, again, just like the idea of being mid-journey, like not to take it back to like the Lord of the Rings or whatever, but it's like once Frodo like goes out on the mission or whatever, like once he's at a certain point, like past a certain point on that journey, like he's never the same. You can't sort of unknow knowledge, right? So like once the moon comes, once the high priestess comes, once you've been tempered, you can't undo the water and the wine. You can't undo what you've known halfway through the journey. You are changed as a person. Like Frodo is now not in the Shire anymore, and there's no way, even if he goes back to the Shire, there's no way back to that quality of nature that he had before he had to, you know, endure those challenges and see that nature of life or whatever.
Hearing this conversation has also reminded me of something not specifically about, you know, Jesus being baptized or Christianity, but another thing that Sagittarius can also be associated with is zealotry. And I think that that's an important thing to remember. That is one extreme, for instance, of the sides that temperance is trying to moderate.
We have to talk about that in Sagittarius because it's the fire sign. Like you think of forest fires and they spread, you know, you have to think of like the spreading of a message like happening far and wide, and how destructive that can be as like a fire force.
Yes. For sure.
So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
For sure. And yeah, I mean, it's yet another way in which temperance is related to the moon, you know, emphasizing that change is stability and the constant fluctuating is that you can't just rest. You can't become static in an extreme or else it's bad. So anyway, slight deviation
The
there.
science deck. I love the science deck.
I
though.
know, it's so amazing. The science deck. This depiction is called Tolerance of Uncertainty. And this is a depiction of a very famous experiment in which there were three students brought into a lab, and they were blindfolded and each told to describe what was in front of them. And they were separated, but they were each touching a part of the elephant. Okay, that's in the middle, who looks very happy, by the way. I'm glad to see that. And one of them felt the tail and thought it was a dead snake. One of them felt the knee and thought it was a boulder. And then the other one felt the trunk and thought it was a hose of some sort, right? And none of them are incorrect. It's just because they only have one little piece of the picture that they're guessing. They're trying, you know, they're seeking the truth, but there are limitations to perception, right? That make it necessary for us to tolerate uncertainty.
Yeah, and we don't see the big picture is really a part of that, you know. And I think again we talked about the play of Mercury and Jupiter and each other's like detriments and things like that. But it's like they are stating the facts, they're limited facts. And it just shows how like Mercury can be wrong. Like you can say, this is exactly what I felt, this is the exact shape and size, I was in this room with these other people. Like and that's all truth. It's true. That's what you have. But you still can't see the big picture. And that's the Jupiterian nature. So, you know, I love that about not really being able to see the big picture, but still being able to state the facts and have them be relative but correct, you know. Yes. So yeah, our perception is relative, and a lot of times we just because of our smallness can't see these big picture natures that Jupiter has. So again, we might perceive something being terrible for us, like circumstance might be like difficult or terrible or whatever, but we don't really know the big picture. That's kind of what I was saying about like the trial through fire is like we might or why cultures put themselves through things like Sundance, like really hard journeys of initiation, because those trial through fire does bring out our character. And also, you know, when we're going through these hard parts of the journey, again, we can't see the big picture, and we don't know that that might actually be a positive in our life. Trial through fire can be a Jupiterian benefic thing, but experienced in a limited form doesn't seem like it.
Yeah, one of the things that is pretty cool about this too, this card, is that first of all, the elephant in the middle also reminds me of some of the giant beasts that we saw in the Picatrix images. But then also, if you notice in the bottom left, there is a basically a small flame heating a beaker. What's cool about that is that the little flame, the sort of burner there, is actually the symbol in the science deck for all of the wands, specifically calling out its relation to the suit of wands here. So I want to compare a few cards now, because as actually we've talked about a couple of times, the moon card maybe doesn't have as much symbolism in common with this Decan as we might otherwise think. And so I wanted to just show how temperance and the moon card, I'm sorry, I keep saying the moon, the high priestess as the card that represents the co-ruler, the moon. So I want to compare temperance and the high priestess cards a little bit to show the relationship between them. And so this is the Mother Peace deck. On the left, we have temperance, and there's a lot going on here that speaks to those opposites that we've considered before, like water and fire, heat and cold. And they're doing a shamanic dance, a sacred dance of energy. I also found it interesting that in the book that comes with the Mother Peace deck, it was referenced, this dancer was referenced as the curer, calling on healing spirits. And this did remind me of our discussion last time about Chiron, the wounded healer that is a centaur in mythology. So that is pretty cool. And then Elsa, you pointed out that the high priestess is seemingly of a similar status and a similar place as this figure in temperance.
Yeah, I can imagine them just being the same priestess, just in it, like the one is in her teepee hut and, you know, in this sort of like lunar interior space of like holding the wisdom. And then in the temperance card, she comes out to perform the ritual as the, you know, another role of the shaman. So to me, you know, and then we see the volcano meets the ocean, kind of like those two extremes, right? Of like the fire and water or something like this. And I don't know, it just seems like maybe it's the same figure, right? The same shamanic figure in two different types of roles.
Yeah. I mean, the high priestess card is absolutely a shaman, and it too actually has those opposites, the black and white pillars. Actually, let me go ahead and move forward to the next slide, where we see the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith deck, high priestess with the pillars of black and white, also speaking to kind of extremes and opposites that she's capable of reconciling.
We're bound to have to face that as healers and shamans, making that sort of reconciling the two opposites.
100%. And then on the right, I figure these two characters from the Dreaming Way deck are also either the same or very similar characters in the High Priestess and the Temperance card. There's definitely a lot in the Temperance card here that reminds me of the moon, and there's colors and symbols of the moon. So I think they're really speaking to each other there, and it's a cool thing to see, to compare them side by side in different decks and see if the artists have picked up on the association.
Yeah, and this one, the green really jumps out at me too, which is a lunar color. Like I usually wear like white or blue for the moon, but green also is mentioned in
Yeah, the like pale green. It's kind of seafoam green or something like that.
Yeah.
One thing I was going to say about the High Priestess, it is corresponding to the twos in the tarot, and every two in the tarot brings a matter of opposition, a matter of conflict, and facing some reality against something that you did or something that you started, you know, and then reality responds to you in a way. So the High Priestess here, with it really represents oppositions and how things that are challenging the nature of a certain thing can really help expose that particular nature, right? So, for instance, if you are a predator and you're hungry and you see a gazelle going by you, you're going to feel compelled to attack, right? Because that is your nature, that evidentiates your nature. So this is kind of the vibe that I get off here. It's opposites that kind of make each other act, that cause action within each other.
Absolutely. And Austin says that, right? Like, we can't have a hero's journey without a adversary or whatever. Like, you have to, like, how are you ever going to know how brave you are, how resilient you are, how you stand up to the face of your fears if you aren't compelled, or if you aren't challenged by
Challenged.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I see the now, I mean, just talking about oppositions, I see the pouring, yeah, it's so deep. I see the pouring from one cup to another is just like literally the symbol of an opposition as well. So I'm digging that. We've talked a lot about the Nine of Wands and some of the symbolism in it, and it is actually echoed throughout so many different decks of a wary looking guard or warrior standing in front of a palisade. So which is a sort of like rough barrier that can be used in battle to protect forces. So you see that in none of these images is this figure very happy. Doesn't look super happy, doesn't always look very energetic either. It looks like they're being expectant and they need to be vigilant. And this is where, again, going back to what we've been talking about, the bravery piece, that's really where it relates to the Nine of Wands.
Again, courage as associated with Mars as well in the ancient texts. You have a necessity for spending a lot of energy and needing a lot of focused action and assertive action. And here in this deck, it's not Mars, it's the moon that we're talking about. So we're talking about some action that is really not focused, it's not assertive, it's just like being ready to battle. It's just like that constant challenge, as Elsa was proposing earlier.
Like it's ready to react, not necessarily to attack,
Yes.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a direct goal or a
No.
specific enemy, just.
And it's kind of like the preparedness that you have to have, that vulnerability of like, okay, if I'm on the mission, and let's say it's, I hear what you're saying about it being scattered in the moon and you don't like have a focus, but it's like, let's say we have to get from point A to point B with our flock or whatever. It's like, you don't know what types of challenges you're going to have to face, right? So in a way, you like have to be ready for everything. Like you might still have like a bigger goal, like the elephant, right? But like in that, there's going to be this multiplicity or this like confusion of like how to meet these different challenges that you don't necessarily know how to deal with, or you're not necessarily prepared for. You just know that you're on this like bigger journey to this one goal, but you have all these sort of interrupters where you have to be, again, that creative resilience.
And again, this is the 9, so it's the completion of the suit. You have the 10, yes, but the 10 is when things have been said and done. This is the climax. The 9 is the climax. The 9 is when everything is revealed in some way. The 10 is more of the outcome or aftermath of things.
Yeah. Like
where you're giving what?
The epilogue.
Yeah, the epilogue of a story. The 9 is really where things come to a head.
Yeah.
And in this case of the suit of wands, it's the individual being expressed through adverse circumstances. This is the ultimate expression of wands, is where you end it all. It's like, why am I even doing what I'm doing through all of these changeable circumstances? It's so I can express and enact something of value to myself. Really, ones are really spiritual in that way. It is truth being revealed through pure, through the purity within one's actions. In other words, when you're challenged, how you instinctively react. The 9 of wands will be the truth of you revealed through those reactions.
Yeah, and it's a test of courage and bravery.
Yeah.
I have a couple of quotations from 36 Secrets, TC's and Chang chapters on this that really, I think were relevant. First of all, she starts off the chapter saying, the power of the suit of wands reaches its peak. The atmosphere ripples and flexes with arcane lunar fire. Gosh, I love that. I love that. Lunar fire. It's amazing. She also uses a few kind of platitudes from popular culture, not platitudes, but quotes from popular culture that epitomize this decan as well, which are, one is quoting Theodore Roosevelt. He says, "Speak softly and carry a big stick. You will go far." That's literally what's depicted here. And the other one is from Nietzsche, who says, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. And that's almost absolutely what this figure is thinking in the card. You can see the thumb.
I thought that was Kelly Clarkson. What are you talking about?
Sorry. She wasn't an original. She wasn't original.
Who is this Nietzsche, and why is he plagiarizing her music?
Plagiarizing Kelly Clarkson. I don't know.
It's the problem with this though. It's the problem with this. It's like annoying. It's annoying to hear those things. It's like, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger and all of that. It's like, it's, you know, it's the moon and Jupiter together. It's like Jupiter wants to see the big picture, but the moon is the multiple. And it's like, the moon is like all these little changing. And Jupiter is like the really big thing. So it's like, you know, it is a little bit of a dichotomy where it's like, oh man, I have to like rise to these challenges again and again. Why does life always have to like have all these tests for me? Like, why do I always have to rise to this occasion? And, you know, but that is really truly how we build knowledge and how we build strength. And, you know, again, if there's no adversary, there's no hero. And if there's, you know, no vulnerability, then there's no time to be great. So it kind of, you know, it forces us into these places where we have to, look at and wrestle with our own goals and the character and like really find that fire inside of us as well. Like, where is that Jupiterian fire?
When during the last decan, when T. Susan Chang was talking about all of Sagittarius and the 3 decans, she talked about shooting a bow and arrow and it progressing from the pulling back of the bow, which was the last decan. This is where the arrow has been released, and the uncertainty as it's going to hit the target, the bullseye, is being felt. You know, like that uncertainty, that tension, and I guess fortitude in the face of that tension is really what's coming through to me here. But I have a question for both of you, but also to any viewers who want to chime in on this, because in the far right card, we also have what looks like a warrior in front of a palisade of wands, but there's a peacock sitting on the top of one of them. That's a peacock, and I'm wondering what that might mean, because in relation to this decan is not super clear, but it is the bird of Hera, the wife of Zeus. It's a symbol of royalty and sometimes immortality, because the peacock loses its feathers every year and grows them back. But
yeah, I mean, for me, it's the pretty peacock is the male peacock, right?
Right.
So we've got the masculine archetype here. And then to me, when I think of peacocks, I only think about Krishna. It's the bird of Krishna. So it's like the lover. Yeah, the masculine archetype of beauty, I think, is something that I could bring in, which is like Jupiter, right? Like it's the guru. It's a beautiful Jupiterian masculine symbol of wealth and beauty. So, and it's kind of, you know, we could go back to that religious zealot thing maybe a little bit, because we think of peacocking, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
You know, warriors being like, I did this journey, and like I did, you know, like kind of like I'm the most beautiful, I'm the most brave, I'm the most right, I'm the smartest, I've got all the answers, like kind of that religious. To me, it does have a little bit of that religious zealot kind of like. And when we think about Jupiter, also we think about kings, right? And when we think about kings, we think about robes of gold or being in the purple, right? We think about purple and red and all of these kind of like untouchable, exactly, and kind of the peacocking of the royals, where it's like displays of wealth and things like this. So you can get a little bit of that, I'm sure, with this 9 of Wands. Is like, look at all I've conquered and look at how brave I am. Look at the knowledge I have. I'm right.
That warrior looks a little bit cocky as well, with his hand
like
on
pompous a little bit or something.
Yep.
Yeah.
Go figure. Okay, so we have three kind of unique cards that stand out to me from the rest of the depictions of Nine of Wands that I wanted to talk with you about to close. To start on the left, we have the Nine of Wands represented in the Science deck, and you can see that little burner in the corner that I was talking about. You can see in the Temperance card, in the bottom left. But the Science deck refers to space, or the emptiness of space. And I am sure as astrologers, you have both had this feeling too, of looking out into the emptiness of space and just trying to conceptualize actually the distance between each of those bodies and how it's unfathomable to us, and how in the grand scheme of things, we are a speck in the universe. But by the same token, remembering that can sometimes guide our actions into being more humane and more helpful and more resilient. Yeah.
Absolutely. To me, the grandness of space is a very Jupiterian idea. And,
Totally.
you know, I personally, I'm in love with things that make me feel small. So like I have Jupiter in the first house, but in Capricorn. So I like to go like climb a mountain and feel like how that journey just, you know, forces me through these like trials and tribulations almost of like how small I am. Or if you take psychedelics or medicine journeys or whatever, that's really the thing, is like how grand is space when, and this star is coming to talk to me, right? This star has an interest in little old me. Like you feel small in the expanse of the universe. You feel small in the expanse of mountainous terrain. And that is like a very humbling, godlike experience to know that like you're in the nature, you're in the presence of your ancestors in these old growth forests. You're in the presence of the ancestors when you're in this space. And the vastness is absolutely incomprehensible, yet it speaks to me, it engages with me. And that's just a beautiful like representation of, you know, the godlike, guru-like essence of Jupiter. I think like when you think of the guru as well, it's like, wait, they could be just like experiencing bliss of enlightenment, but they come back for me, to help me, to hold my hand, to explain these petty little things to me again and again. And it's just really beautiful. And to me, that's that compassion of Jupiter, is this huge grand scale of seeing the sky at night in a place with no light pollution, just how many stars there actually are, and how we are trying to alchemize with them as astrologers, right? Like we're speaking the language of the stars and the vastness of the cosmos, and the fact that they have anything to say to us and that we have any relationship to them. I think, you know, in cultures throughout time have looked to the sky for guidance, both physical and spiritual, and it just kind of connects us to the grandness, and that we have some kind of a place in it is a godlike quality.
100%. What's so interesting though, by the same token, is that space can be scary. Space and emptiness. I know that, you know, there are people who say it's their most feared way to die is just like spiraling out into space or something like that. I hate those parts of science fiction movies where they get kicked out of the rocket ship and just float off into oblivion, and that's scary. And that's the vigilance.
I would actually prefer to die that way. It would be pretty quick.
It'd be pretty adventurous, wouldn't it?
Pretty adventurous.
To me, it makes it
maybe painful, but quick.
You get some good views, hopefully.
Very painful,
but you know,
it
can be very overwhelming. And I think that is something, again, that like relates a little bit to the guy on the Nine of Wands cards that we saw previously, is that he's exhausted, he's overwhelmed, but he's still aware.
Well, that's what it is when we face anything that's too big for our comprehension, or just too big in general. It's like all of a sudden we're like lost in the details. We don't even really know how to take it in. And it absolutely is scary. And I think, like, you know, I don't know how many of you guys are like Graham Hancock fans, but I'm a huge Graham Hancock fan, and I've read all of his books and all these things. And he talks about ancient cultures and how they were constantly looking up at the sky, and not just towards God and messages from the stars, but like literally there was huge like disasters that would come from the sky. Like we would go through these in early humanity, we would go through these crazy impact strikes through things that were coming from the sky, right? Like the Pleistocene age and the like younger Dryas, we were apparently hitting through these like sky debris all of the time, right? So it's just like you're looking to the sky as like these gods, like, look at the sky and oh man, some of the stars are moving. That's kind of freaky actually, right? And oh man, things are falling from the sky and they like can hit us and things like that. So it's not just looking at the sky as like, oh, like some gods and look at how beautiful it is. It's actually this very vulnerable experience because things can
Like
come
there must
from
be
the sky.
somebody throwing shit at me. It must be that there's somebody up there.
And also lightning in the sky and thunder. Like you have Zeus, you have Jupiter, you have things happening in the sky. Things are coming down from the sky, falling onto Earth, disrupting nature as I know it, or the climate as I know it. And there's like thunder and lightning, and it's striking around me. And I have like it's a very vulnerable experience. And I think looking at the sky for the ancients was in like a very trepidatious kind of like fear / awe experience that we have as primordial cultures or ancient cultures in our relationship with the sky.
Totally.
And even now with deep space, like space travel, and to me it's like extremely claustrophobic. And any expanse really, if you think about exploring the ocean or exploring like the terrain of Earth, like in deep expanse there's tons of unknown and tons of fear.
God, shoot me to space and just leave me at the moon.
This is also serving as a plug for the show The Expanse. Go watch it. It's on Amazon Prime. Also, the main bad guy looks a lot like you, David. Are you Marco Sonaros secretly?
David's actually just flattered that you would think of him as like the villain.
Movie star level. I wanted to bring up the Mother Peace deck because it's an image that really speaks to the shaman women that we saw in both the High Priestess and in the Temperance deck. She's showing a mastery of self-control, which is something that a warrior would need as well. And she can do this. She can sit in the heat of those flames better than a younger person could because of the trials and tribulations that she's been through.
And I want to say a little bit of something about tapas here, which is like a yogic cultivation of inner fire, where you cultivate the fire from within and that burns away your impurities. And when you're cultivating tapas, this is this type of endurance that you need to be able to sit in meditation. And yoga, all of yoga and its postures are putting your body through the purification fire in order to allow your body to be agile enough and vulnerable enough and strong enough to be able to sit in. For anyone that's ever tried to sit on the floor for any extended period of time, we know how hard that is. And all of that tapas and all that yoga and all that inner fire is to be able to achieve being able to sit and go within. So again, that's that outer fire and inner fire kind of combo.
Yeah, then the snakes as well on the side are kind of harkening back to some Kundalini energy, which has to do with that sort of initiation, transformation elements that we spoke to in Temperance as well.
Absolutely, that Shakti energy.
The Nine of Wands in the medieval Scapini deck is super interesting. It's kind of a pretty card. It's a stack of what the White Books describes as bandits. Bandits who are all piled on top of each other with their wands in various stages of drunkenness and ill health. At the top, you see two ships approaching, and they both are bearing sigils of the moon, which I think is very interesting for this card. The Nine of Wands is not often associated, I feel like, with actual battle, but here we see like a literal approaching battle. These ships are approaching them to attack them, potentially kill them. So yeah, it's like kind of anxiety inducing, like these guys just relaxing and mucking about when there's an attack coming. So
This really reminds me of like Jupiter in its like, you got this rainbow, right, of color, this plethora. When I think of rainbows, I think of Jupiter a lot of the time too. Is like this plethora of various stages of intoxication. Jupiter is intoxication as well. Like Jupiter loves to get drunk and indulge too much in drink and drugs and stuff. And if you do that, then you're not able to battle with those wands at all. You're not able to see the ships coming. Like if you're just indulging in drunkenness, you're not able to see that multiplicity of threat on your journey because you're too busy, like slothing around or whatever. And Jupiter definitely has can't see the bigger picture and can't see the threat or can't continue the journey when it gets stuck in like drinking and things like that.
Yep.
Overindulgence, just overindulgence in general.
It is true.
All right, y'all. So shall we go through a couple nativities before we close out?
Yeah, David, did you want to mention any?
Well, we have Britney Spears in the second. Queen, stronger than yesterday. Now it's nothing but her way. She has been through a whole ordeal throughout her life, with her father, with her family in general. And she kept it up. She just kept on going, did her thing, kept on working as much as she did.
Endurance and resilience. And go ahead and follow David's channel here on YouTube in the first place here on YouTube, because soon he will be putting out his Britney talk. And he did a whole chart analysis for Britney at the AFAN's presentation a couple weeks back. So go ahead and follow there because we will be putting that out shortly with that presentation again for his channel. So yeah, Britney Spears, that's a big one, and she's a big one for us. And then you see so many like crazy celebrities like Jay-Z, right? Like he's been a celebrity forever and he went from like rapper to entrepreneur. And you see again in him, I think you just see like a steadfastness, like really a trailblazer. I don't think we've said that specific term, but I think it's a perfect
applies for
term
sure
for Sagittarius II, trailblazing.
Yep.
Yeah, and
we also have Mary Queen of Scots as an important figure because she famously died a Catholic martyr for her faith in Catholicism. Sorry?
Oh, I was just singing zealotry in the background.
Yeah, and she put up like a straight face up until the end. She was shaking, she was afraid when she died, but she still wore a red dress, which was a symbol for Catholic martyrs at the time when she was beheaded. And she was beheaded by the Queen of England. She was the Queen of Scotland. She was kept prisoner for decades and then beheaded by the Queen of England, Elizabeth I, after a few uprisings in her name were discovered brewing under the surface. And
amongst religious zealots, we see very much martyrdom, right? Like that idea, whether it's Pisces or Sagittarius, we see like religious martyrs, religious zealots, like willing to die for your beliefs. Like that's a huge.
But also maintaining her claim, something that we said throughout this video, maintaining her claim to the British throne, because Mary Queen of Scots died pretty much maintaining that she had a better claim, which she really did, to the throne than Tudor Elizabeth. And that's what Elizabeth was so afraid of. That's what she didn't like about Mary Queen of Scots. And Mary never gave up on that particular stance. She never, she always said to Elizabeth, I bear you no ill will, but come on, I have a better claim than you. If when push comes to shove, I have a better claim than you, and you know it. And Elizabeth knew it. And that's just why she died. And so she stuck through it. She stuck to it through the end.
I think Sinead O'Connor is another martyr-like figure who ripped up speaking of the other side, she ripped up the picture of the Pope, on Saturday Night Live in front of live television in the 90s. And whew.
Yeah. And again, we see that rebellion, that fire like rebellion. And then we've got like Jim Morrison, who is famously like wild on the outside, but like this journey, like this voyage or through the, you know, doors of perception, where again we see that like inner and outer journey, Sagittarius. And then we've got Ozzy Osbourne, who is again kind of like a controversial, like groundbreaking figure. If you think of like Black Sabbath at the time, that was a very like, when you had all the hippie free love, like he was very like dark and edgy. Nicki Minaj, who's another extremely, extremely rich and famous, like Jay-Z status, you know, performer, who's again just like, no one can touch me. It's that very much like you know, wands, fire, Sagittarian, Jupiter.
Also quite defensive.
Yeah, I was thinking she's like the figure in the Nine of Wands.
Yeah, like a larger than life kind of persona as well. Like, and definitely I think to get to that type of stardom, like Britney Spears or Nicki Minaj or Jay-Z or something like that, you really have to have this fortitude through the haters and through the challenges and through the multiplicity. So I hate to rush through it. I have about 10 minutes. Do we want to just go through the list? Anything you guys want to say about any of the other ones that besides just their names?
No.
Yeah, I just want to mention Walt Disney was born in this decan. Fred Armisen, John Malkovich. I've used some of them as absurdists, really good examples of Sagittarian humor, as is Richard Pryor is in here as well. And finally, I think as far as the zealotry goes in a non-religious sense, we also have Noam Chomsky, who's a pretty famous academic and intellectual from the 80s and 90s.
And Noam Chomsky.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I know we've got, I mean, this is a heavy hitting list, honestly, like, and not to, you know, I'm sorry that we have to kind of cut it a little close today, you guys, but we also have Little Richard, you know, Sammy Davis Jr. So we've got some serious heavy hitters through this decade.
Totally.
Lucy Liu, John Waters.
I love John Waters. Oh my God.
And then, you know, Walt Disney, of course, like you said, this very Jupiterian, big thinking, like pushing through, but also controversial figure. Speaking of controversial figures, we've got Woody Allen, who's been coming up recently. And yeah, very, very interesting list. So again, thank you all for joining us for Sagittarius II. We will see you in the third decan of Sagittarius. And like always, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification, and get us to 300. We're almost there. We're at like 240 something today. So we are going to announce our giveaway next time and see what we can't give you all to get us to that 300, because I'm sure we're going to be there with your help. We'll be at 300 next time. And you can find David Fisher at In the First Place Astrology on most platforms, inthefirstplaceastrology.com, and KG Dayton at kgdayton.com. And myself and all of our stuff is in the About section of this page. So hit us up for readings anytime. Thank you both for joining me. And would you like to lead us out with the poem, Katie?
Yeah, absolutely. So the poem at the end of Chang's chapter on the Nine of Wands is by Alison Lurie. It's called The Archer with His Arrow. The archer with his arrow dare open out his bow. Luck being law of gaming, aiming he may not know. Where arrows go, the chase, the chance is narrow. This margin narrows ours. Plowers and seeds are slow. No winter harvest either, neither can trees ungrow, nor brooks unflow, nor fields suck back their flowers. This is the way, the warning, corn in cold fields to grow. Arrows to aim where hair is, there is no way I know, then plant in snow and shoot blind in the morning.
Matao kako bersama yo demikian soba da soba kena matai bang nak kau mati mawa demikian soba dan soba atai bang nak au kamaya ta onga ija koyo okoyo masena mataribe kana sabaso inakina tabaine